is an alert that is not normal in the literal sense that normally we don't see this in America. The president trying to abuse or widen what are traditional executive powers and doing it on a blatantly partisan basis. Take a look at the Democratic-led cities that continuously face the threat or enactment of the deployment of troops. This week begins with the National Guard directed to Portland, Oregon, dealing with what Donald Trump says could be a full-force effort to deal with protests against ICE. Now, the troops are not on the ground. This is a developing story, and the city is pushing back swiftly, suing with the legal argument that Trump would not have the authority to call in the Guard here, that is a state power, and in a related skirmish, one where he already overstepped in California. Portlanders also turning out Sunday to protest this. Clashes escalating meanwhile in Chicago. ICE agents seen in tactical gear walking or sort of marching downtown. Lawmakers, who of course also locally have an obligation to deal with immigration and security, say they viewed this as more of an intimidation show than serious patrols. One ICE official saying agents are making arrests based on looks, something they feel empowered to do. The Democratic governor pushing back.
If federal agents march down busy streets, harassing civilians and demanding their papers, what would we say? I don't think we'd have any trouble calling it what it is: authoritarianism. So let's not pretend it's something else when it happens in our American cities.
The governor trying to summon the way that we as Americans sometimes look abroad with a little more judgment than we might at home. And there is a wider context. The habitual threat and deployment of troops in America when there is not massive unrest, when there are not multi-day riots or blackouts or the type of things that used to justify what was then state-federal coordination, is one sign of this kind of federal power grab. Another is a president making Watergate-level confessions about wanting to indict his enemies, evidence or not, and getting away with it, at least getting the DOJ to start the process. That's what happened last week. And as I've told you in our reporting, you can't separate the efforts to go after Trump's enemies without evidence, like former FBI Director Comey, lawmakers who've already been indicted, and others. You can't separate that from the troop deployment because it's all part of this effort to see how much power he can abuse federally. And if you want to use a partisan lens, we start with the evidence. But if you look at how this is playing, there are even some Republicans and conservatives who agree with the overwhelming legal expert and nonpartisan consensus that the rushed, unusual process to indict Mr. Comey after the president's demands isn't on the level.
I don't think there's a case.
This is not a slam dunk.
I don't see any way in the world that, Comey will be convicted.
Premised on something that's not true.
The indictment itself is quite weak, and that it's unlikely to survive in court.
It's been shot up with Ozempic. That is how lean it is.
This case should be thrown out.
There's a good chance because of, the wholly unconstitutional, authoritarian way that this was done, that the case may get tossed out well before trial.
The last voice talking about the authoritarian framework for this Trump DOJ case is someone who was a Trump defense lawyer. These are not exactly big Trump critics. They're just saying what we know from the evidence, which is that there's no valid case there. We'll cover it. And if more evidence against Comey were to emerge, we'll cover that. But right now, you have this rushed partisan indictment without evidence. When asked whether the DOJ should investigate another former FBI director that Trump hired, he says, I would think they're doing that. Last week, Trump also pushed for the firing in the free market, private company Microsoft, who employs someone who's well respected within that company and within government experience, Lisa Monaco. Her crime or sin in Trump's inverted view is that she served in a different party's administration. She was Deputy Attorney General. That's not all. Trump also demanding investigations of groups that he considers contrary to his own political interests, including a not-for-profit foundation tied with money from George Soros. His executive order literally targets domestic opposition, which he calls the radical left. Jennifer Rubin, longtime writer, Washington Post veteran, warns we are not a functioning democracy bound by the rule of law against those infractions. I'm joined by the New York Times Magazine's Emily Bazelon and Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University. Emily, I quote Rubin there because she makes the point that any one of these things would have been a serious scandal. The call to indict people after the DOJ process finds they're not even eligible under probable cause to be pursued anymore in the Comey case is an impeachable offense if the facts don't change based on what we know. And Rubin argues there that these things are being stacked up against each other, and we also have the push for more troops in the streets tonight, Emily.
Right. There are a lot of efforts here to expand executive power, kind of on all fronts. And to go back to the indictment of James Comey, the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, who was a Trump appointee, reviewed the evidence after an investigation of his staff and decided there wasn't enough evidence to charge Comey. And so then you have Comey ordering Pam Bondi, the attorney general, to take action now with lots of exclamation points from Trump. And then you see him install his insurance lawyer as the replacement for the U.S. attorney. And now these charges are being brought. So it's very rare for prosecutors to ever lose a case for what's called vindictive prosecution. But here what you're seeing is this very public direct line from Trump's desire to take revenge on a perceived enemy to criminal charges that carry a prison sentence.
Yeah. And Professor, I want to play what Andrew Weissman said about this, the strength of the case.
Having looked at what's now the reporting about what is actually the substance of the claim here, it seems unbelievably weak. If James Comey's going to say, I didn't do it, and the only other person who's part of that conversation said he didn't do it, you really have to wonder, where is the proof? And it starts looking like there's a reason that the career prosecutors and the former head of the Eastern District of Virginia were saying that you should not bring this case, because who are they going to rely on?
That's one case. And Professor Greer, then when we put up the many other items, the talk about whether it's autocratic, whether it's potentially the musings of a wannabe dictator, those are words. Up on the screen, we have the facts. This is what's actually being done, and this is in a single week. How important is it, Professor, that people understand that as we look for guardrails?
Yeah, I mean, Ari, the swiftness of what's been happening these past few months, but especially this past month, have been quite intense.